Welcome to Santa Barbara Talks with Josh Molina. I'm here today with one of my favorite people to interview, and one of the people who helped me out a couple of years ago when I was starting the podcast, and I'll always remember that. And she took the time out of her day on a weekend to meet me and have a great conversation. So I'm really grateful for that. And now here we are back. Wendy Sims-Moten, how are you doing today?
I'm great, Josh. Thank you so much for again, we get to have a conversation. And I remember that conversation that we had. It was just, not too soon after the Martin Luther King program, and where I was speaking about uncommon courage, what we have to do to make hard decisions. So I'm glad to be back and looking forward to the conversation, because I think that's the thing as we move forward. It's really important to continue the conversation, not just a one time and done time.
Yes, exactly. And you serve on the Santa Barbara Unified School District Board of Education. And yeah, you reminded me, you had that talk about uncommon courage, and it really sort of applies now as well to what we're talking about is the state of Santa Barbara Unified School District schools in terms of the racial climate. And I want to talk to you because you've been a leader in the community. You aren't one of these leaders who every time you have a microphone in front of you, you choose to grandstand. You're not one of those, thankfully, because when you do speak, it has power and it has impact and it has meaning. And you can tell that you're picking your spots and you're speaking from the heart, and you're not trying to talk every time just for the soundbite. I noticed that, okay? And I've noticed it for several years that I've been reporting on you. Let's talk about Santa Barbara Unified. And I wanted to talk to you because of last Tuesday, there was a school board meeting, and there's this discussion going on about how does the district respond to these racial incidents in the district. We had the very high profile incident at Santa Barbara Junior High, where it was a hate crime by some students against a Black student. And they attacked him, they used the N-word. There was all sorts of trauma associated with that. And the school district responded, and then they were going to sort of have this follow-up meeting. And then at this follow-up meeting, more people called in and said that you haven't done enough. There have been other incidents, and it sort of exploded into the public comment, sort of attacking some of the district members, the board members. And you really seized the moment to talk about, hey, let's talk about this in a very real way. And I sort of felt you were holding everyone accountable, not just the people in the room, even some of the callers you were holding accountable. So can you talk about what happened in that moment when you are dealing with all of this pressure to make change? You've been in the seat for a while. What caused you to sort of speak the way you did and talk about, hey, we all need to rework this, and we need to stop this, and we need to figure this out because the kids are the ones who are losing here? Can you talk a little bit about this moment?
Proud I am, and what a privilege I feel. And as being a Santa Barbara Unified School District board member, I'm really proud of the district, of being a part of that district, taking on challenges, doing the things that we can do best, making sure that we are, again, our mission is preparing our kids for a world that's yet to be created. And I think it is our responsibility in what we do to prepare that world that's yet to be created, one that is free and minimizing, racism and being more diverse and inclusive and equity. All of those things are in preparation of an environment where our kids can be their best and reach their best potential. So I know that we're working toward that, and we're working on things that have long-term systemic issues. And so it's not just gonna, happen in a short period of time because there's this direct attention. The things that we're doing and moving forward, it's going to take us some time. I think it's really important for us to keep communicating what we're doing, where we're going, where we may have started in a certain direction, and maybe it wasn't exactly. We need to adapt and adjust to that. But that has to be who we are, no matter what is going on, because it's ingrained in what we're going to do, always looking forward. And so in that moment, I think it's time to speak. You speak when it's time to speak, when it makes sense to speak. So it doesn't get just that sound bite, as we had talked about many times about a sound bite, because I don't want this to be a sound bite in time. We have got to continue to go forward. And so there where you see me really stepping forward. And to be honest, my spirit was really low when when this first happened. And I just was really didn't have the words to express. And so it wasn't new, but the fact that we're here again, talking about this means that we have not done enough to continue the conversation with our children, with our students, with our community. And I know that it's a hard conversation, but it doesn't mean that it's not necessary and that we don't have to do that. So we don't have these explosive moments, right? And so in the term that it feels like we're reacting because we haven't perhaps done all the work and the continued work and the sustained work. So rather it being a reaction, it's a response to what's going on. And I literally, I was just disappointed. And I had to take a step back and think about what it meant to me as a leader in this community, certainly as a board member. I speak today not only as a board member, but I speak as a member and a leader in this community, a mother of parents of a son who went through Santa Barbara Unified School District, had my own experiences with that. And so at that moment, I had listened, I had heard, and of course there's many conversations about what was happening, people's perceived happening, and only take this as an opportunity to move their own agenda forward as opposed to keeping it focused on what we need to do, which is part of some of the comments in a very respectful way, being direct about it. I also talk about my mother so gracefully direct. So you're not, you're not being distracted by emotion and feeling, but rather let's deal with this respectful way. I acknowledge what you're feeling, and hopefully you're acknowledging what I'm feeling. And at that moment, Josh, I felt so vulnerable and so exposed. And I don't think, but I wasn't any less convicted or committed in my conviction to moving forward. It was like I am drawing a line in the sand right now. And if we don't do what we need to do, all we can in this moment to start doing what we need to do, even though it's hard to do that, when will we ever do it? Because we will come back around. So that's what I was thinking about that, and that I'm one in my thoughts right now, because obviously we have a public conversation, and it was important at that moment to put this type of concerns and issues in a discussion so that we can talk. Oftentimes public comment is used for just to heighten up different things, and as a board, as part of Brown Act, we can't really respond because we started a discussion that wasn't agendized. It creates all sorts of other things. So I'm like, we need to make sure from that meeting, that first meeting, that the public comment come out, we need to have a space where it's discussion so that we have time and people know that it's going to happen and what's happening. So it was crucial. And so I really, really had to think about how I was feeling. And like I said, I was disappointed and my spirit was just really low. And I said, this is the moment that we have to seize. And in this moment, we're here in this moment, and how are we going to move forward? And people say, well, how did we get here? Well, we've kind of been here, but the question I was asking myself is, how do we grow from here, and where do we grow from here? Because there's opportunities to do so. And so I was ready to draw that sign in my own line in the sand to Wendy, what are you going to do to step up and say what needs to be said from your perspective, one who has experienced it, who has lived it, and how we need to call in the community. An invitation is you're calling someone in, you're welcoming them in, right? And so how do we do that? And I felt that was really important too, and anything that I'm trying to do, and in this moment, that's going to go far beyond that. And I think part of it is that, the training that you hear about, the anti-bias training, all of those things was there. And I think it's for a moment, but it has to be sustained, it has to be in everything that we do, has to be aligned. And so there's no question about it. And I think sometimes we are afraid of the liability that we may face, regarding putting up those social justice and equity and diversity, and groups who may not think that way, figure this is a public institution, therefore you shouldn't be doing these things. And so I think we may be afraid, a little shy of doing that, and a little hesitant in doing that, but for the liability. But I think the liability is far greater if we don't do it. In terms of that, the harm is there. I felt like, I think I said, in that moment, I said, it feels like that happened to me also too, movement in that moment. People were calling in. And so that means that the harm that was done, or the incidents that were done, had not really been addressed. They maybe just been, put up there and put a dressing on it. And this is no blame, really, about anything. It's something that we need to carry forward and really start to look at it. And that's where I'm saying we need to take the pause and do an assessment of where we are, because that assessment is going to tell us. That's like a mirror. Look at, and if done correctly, if done right, that's going to be that mirror. But that's what we need to have the baseline to move forward, because that will be part of responding as opposed to reacting to the situation. So it might, I tell you, my heart was beating, because I knew in that moment it was vulnerable, and being open and seeking the courage to what I know I needed to do.
Right. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about sort of what was happening in the room. It's tough, right? Because you have to make decisions for everybody, not just those who are the most upset or the most vocal. And so you're in there and you're being criticized for the board. The board is being criticized, Fran Wagnick specifically by name, by some, for showing anti-Blackness. Okay. And so when that term comes up, there's a whole bunch of other people who are hearing that term and getting offended by it. Right. They're like, what is this? They don't understand it, and so can you define that term? What does that term mean? And also, is the district, are they trying to perpetuate anti-Blackness from your perspective? Can you kind of unpack those?
Yeah, thank you. I think, I don't know. I think when you talk about this is a crime against a young Black man, young Black boy, young man, as I would think about, I want to see them, I want to respect their maturity and where they are with regards to how they identify, young Black men. And it's like calling it what it is. There are all sorts of racism. So in general terms, absolutely, we need to make sure, because there's racism going in all different places. And as we look in terms of where we're sitting in classes, where we're talking. So there's a lot of things that is going on, racial wise, and it also has a racial undertone to it. I think the anti-Blackness is that's just part of racism. It's not different, but it feels from a Black person's perspective, you're not really understanding the extra that goes on when it's perpetuated on a Black person. It's extra. I can't explain it, but it's extra. And when you don't call out that extra part, that feels like it's like we're invisible. I think it kind of carries across. You've seen me and heard me many times when we're looking at our data, and I will say, wait a minute, where is the data on our African American students? Well, you're too small. So that's like, so that feels anti. You don't really want to talk about that. That's the anti. Talk about it, speak about it, so that people don't feel invisible. And because there's a certain, we have a long history of anti-Blackness in this country. And so it's that hard part you don't want to sit and talk about, that it feels like you're slow to react because of what the whole nature is going to happen about this anti-Black. It's anti, meaning that you don't really think that's important enough. And I think it's because sometimes it's unintentionally in other places trying to be respectful, if you will, of protecting one. So it's, if I were comparing data, when I say, well, where is the numbers? It's too small. It just says you're never too small to count, but it feels like that. And so when we don't really want to let that know, when perhaps because we haven't dealt with that in recognizing, it feels anti. And until you really had that conversation, for those who are like, what does that mean? Because when I thought it's anti-Black, I had to stop and think about what that was. That sometimes is a living experience. You don't really want to know the experience of being Black. There's something extra about it, And so when those who may be saying, what's that about, or it's this, let's have a conversation so that I can understand where you're not seeing that, so that I can, and then you can also see where it is, because you are walking in my shoes, that you're saying that's not an important piece because we need to elevate that it's a Black young man, because we're saying it's racism across. It's not that generic. You need to call it out. Yeah. And the more that you're able to call it out, then you have the conversations in a greater understanding of why it feels this way, why it is that way, why the perception is that way.
And so much of this, when it comes to leaders, of course, no one is overtly anything. Right? I think for the most part, the people who are in charge, who are leading, who are decision makers, they really want to do the right thing. However, they struggle with what the right thing means, because in many cases they're handcuffed. They're afraid to communicate, because if they communicate in a way that is authentic to them, where they're just sort of asking questions, they're going to feel judged, or they're going to feel like they're going to say the wrong thing, and then there's going to be a whole cancel them backlash. So a lot of them just don't have the tools to, how do I do this? Or they don't have the credibility. In your experience dealing with board members, dealing with the district staff, what is your characterization of their intent and how they want to address this issue of racial prejudice and racial violence in schools?
Yeah, my experience is that, with staff, again, for me, it's about the relationship. Because if you have a relationship, you start to establish relationships, that's when you can really decipher out, are you authentic? And I can tell you, in a respectful way, that this sounds like this. So for instance, when Fran was making her report, I was saying, this sounds defensive. Mm-hmm. But because they know in the relationship, again, over time, that I'm going to be straightforward, and I'm going to always try to see the other side, but I'm not going to try to minimize what is directly impacting me to make you feel comfortable. It's going to take all of us being willing to be open together to better understand what it looks like, and to point it out. Well, it's coming across this way is unauthentic, not authentic about that. Mm-hmm. It's coming across like that. And maybe that's not your intent, but let's talk about how it comes across so that we can better understand it. And again, I don't think anyone is. They might be. And hopefully, when we assess this climate, which is why it's important to have a third-party independent climate assessment, because people, hopefully they're going to look at this as, how do we better understand ourselves in that mirror, looking at us, our mirror that we put up as a district, to really say, here's what it is, here's perception, and here's what we need to do to be more authentic when people feel like that. So again, how do we start to work toward that, acknowledge it, and all the work is the anti-bias work, the anti-Black work, all those things, those terminologies need to be a part of the ongoing conversation, so that one who may not necessarily be directly experiencing, such as the board, we have a diverse board in terms of like, I don't know if I want to speak. You shouldn't be afraid to speak, but you also have to take a good look within yourself. Am I? Because all of this works in the beginning, starts with you and how you react to things, and it's obviously based on your experience. So I think, the steps that we're taking, and the heat that we take as a board, we were one of the first districts to mandate ethnic studies, and how we're doing that, and looking at things and looking forward and moving and doing the hard work to make sure that, again, we are taking into all accounts. When we have those differencing of opinions is when we really need to have those conversations. I think that the conversations with someone who thinks differently, they shouldn't just stop at this moment. I think this is the beginning, and we have to always circle around. So I'm hoping, Josh, that as we are going through this, that we have reporters coming in. This is an ongoing story. What is the district doing? We are poised right now to start doing things differently. As a community, as a district, we have to start here and use this as a starting point, and don't be afraid, because fear will freeze you, but conversations and facing that fear will free us a lot better and a lot easier.
That's good. Well, very well said. I want to talk to you about the training that used to take place in schools, and maybe you can educate me about what's still happening. But if we remember a few years ago, when Kerry Matsuoka was superintendent, there was a backlash among certain members of the community who were saying this implicit bias training, this cultural proficiency training, is harmful. It teaches kids to not like white people, to consider white people to be, the enemy, and, sort of the European dominant culture is the problem. And so there was a backlash. Okay. And then I don't think just communities, I don't think that contract was renewed. I think that went away as probably part of the pressure. One of the things as a journalist that bothers me, and you see this come out in my reporting, and you've heard me talk about this, is a lot of times these board members are into this for themselves, and I'm not going to name names, but they're running for other offices. They're thinking, what do I say now going to do that might affect me down the road? How do I stay safe in this moment and still look like I'm trying to do the right thing? That's not unique to the Santa Barbara School Board. That happens everywhere with electeds. Did the district unfairly eliminate, or unnecessarily, or did it make a mistake by not renewing the Just Communities contract, or some kind of contract that allows for these conversations and these trainings to happen at schools?
Well, as you know, it's anything, even in this moment, it's controversial, it's complicated. And again, we're a public institution and having to be accountable for the public, to our parents, to our students, and into the community. So that's a complicated issue. That work was happening, before our board was seated. In terms of that, and they started to address those issues again. And, in terms of addressing those issues, it's people who feel that finding out the truth sometimes, or talking about the truth about what is happening, feel like they're being blamed for something. And so as a perceived blame, we're just going to blame you for everything that's happening. But there's a root cause of it. And I think the anti-bias training, if done correctly, if keep moving it forward and making it consistent, making it a part of who we are as a district, who we are as a community, with regards to, how do we address it so that you feel like you're doing what you need to do, again, to prepare our students for the world that they're living in, and one that we're hopefully going to be creating better for them with in there. So it was a very complicated process. We approved that process, and in terms of a lot of things. And so in this end, not necessarily making a mistake, but perhaps taking a pause on how we're going to do this work going forward in this environment, given what was happening, there. And I think how we can go forward with that work, I think using, the assessment will really get at the baseline. It will also hope not only gather where people are right now, but where have you been? You did have this type of training. What happened, that derailed it for one reason or another? Of course, there was the lawsuits that's been publicly done, all those other things. So how we get back on that? And then, of course, there was this huge thing called COVID that kind of got in the way. But I think we're at this point revisiting work about anti-bias. How do we do it? Which is why I've said, make sure we have an independent third party here, because you're in the middle of things, and you go from where you go, your experience. And I think, So I think we're going to revisit our anti-bias work. Who it's going to be with will be determined based on the outcome of those results and how best to serve this need and to continue to address this and be part of who we are as a unified school district to go forward.
Okay. One of the things that I hear from people, and as you know, you hear from people too, this subtext has come up that we need to also educate the Latinx community about racial prejudice and bias. I've received comments from white people saying, oh, look, they've made us the enemy. And now really, some of these disputes don't have to do with white people. They have to do with Latinx and Black people. A real misunderstanding of the situation, by the way, but some of that subtext is there and no one's really calling it out specifically. They're alluding to it. It's very sensitive and difficult. Can you talk about that? What sort of your view is on the role of the board in terms of talking about this conversation as not just being a Black-white thing, and how do you navigate that whole situation? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, racism is about everybody. So, we know way back in the day, there was the divide and conquer. Back in the day when you had the house slaves versus the field slaves and the white and the colorism. And that is society that if you this a certain look, a certain thing, that creates division within your own communities. So that's real. And it has not, in terms of, it's almost like, it's like, well, that's really against them and that's not against us. See, that's not us and them. It's everybody. Everybody has a role to look at it, and some things are mandated by law that you have to focus on different things. So how do we, in every aspect of what we do, be mindful of this? And again, use it as an opportunity to educate. So let's talk about that. So that's what I'm hearing. And hopefully, again, I would, with the risk of repeating myself, really this climate is not just about a session of racial, but how are we responding? How are we interacting about things? Do we realize the perception of how we may address one thing or another? Is that coming across with racial undertones and giving an opportunity for someone to say, wow, this takes the focus off of us because they're fighting amongst each other, and realizing perhaps that might be being encouraged.
Yeah.
Y'all fight amongst yourselves.
Yeah.
So that it kind of takes the pressure. But everybody has a role to play, a role of understanding, a role of the actions in it, that we have to do things differently and take that step back and say, wait a minute, and I think that, one of the things I said, I want, when this happened, I was certainly my care and concern for the young man who this was done to, and the concern about how do we talk to these young men who were part of the ones who did this, and do you understand what this means and what this looks like? So talking to them as well in terms of that. And sometimes it is about talking. We know our kids are where they are, and they're sometimes reflecting community things that are going on in the community. And is there broader something going on in the community that we may not be aware of? And so how do we, again, broaden out, like what's going on? And the only way that we're going to find those things out is to have the conversation. I know it feels like we're just talking. It's talking to then start to put into action and start to implement those things, going forward. I was talking to someone. I've had several comments and calls and and texts and all sorts of things. And I know that I am in a privileged spot to be able to say the things that I need to say directly because of who I am. And I work hard at that, not trying to be some persona that I'm not, but I work hard to make sure that I'm able to say directly without disrespecting you and expecting the same back. And then I'm going to speak truth. And I'm going to, hopefully, when I'm asking something that I want to ask authentically, you're feeling that way, but help me understand why you're feeling that way, right? And so I think that's the same thing. It's what we're doing intentionally. What we're doing is a part of what we do. So nobody can say, well, it's them over there. No, it's all of us. Mm-hmm. It's all of us. It's not one us against them. And maybe when it's heightened up, we'll say, maybe that's bringing ourselves aware of it. Like, are you aware that there seems to be a little uptick in that? What's going on here? Is it something we adults may not be aware of. And I want to say that student voice is very critical. It's very powerful in here. And, I hold my students accountable too. I want you to be a part of creating the environment that you want to be in and go to school on and be proud of, and helping each other get there, not attacking each other, but calling people in and, hey, dude, that's not cool. That's making us look bad, that kind of thing. So just, making sure that voice is there as well. I say that to the various students that I appreciate what you're doing, but I'm going to hold you accountable for what your behavior is.
Yeah.
So you need to be on this part too. And so I think we're doing that, and allow it not to be someone else's agenda, because that's what happens sometimes. People want to take an incident and make it their agenda for whatever it is they want to make it. But we need to call that out and respectfully. No, here's what it's about. Let's come back to the center about what it's about and what it's not.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And you mentioned that, not in just, you said in the meeting, not in just this loud moments, but consistently, what are we doing? And the last thing I want to ask you about as it relates to that meeting was, I guess, just this applies to communication in general. There's often, it must be tough as a school board member, because you were getting criticized from everyone, from a lot of different perspectives. Of course, you get a lot of support, right? But the critics are the loudest. So we just dealt with COVID, right? The people who don't want masks or vaccines, you're getting attacked very personally. In this moment, the board's getting criticized for not doing enough, for not communicating enough. Can you talk about communication, and is that an effective way? I know that the response to this is, Josh, if we don't talk like this, if we don't make a big deal, that they're not going to listen. And I get that. But do you feel as though you want to do a better job as a board member when you're attacked personally? What can you say about that kind of communication? If you're speaking to public commenters, does that work? Does that not work? What is your attitude when you're listening to them?
People need to be heard, and I understand that. And we're a public institution, and public comment has become not just this, really the opportunity for the public to participate in the board meeting. This is not the public, it's the board meeting doing board business, and we want to make sure, again, we hear from the public. And you could be passionate about that, but I'm not into the disrespectful and feeling like the board should be moving, in a certain way. If I go personal, the minute you go personal against any board member, the minute, for me, I'm no longer listening, and I'm one of 5. But that's my attitude toward that. I'm going to listen openly with an open mind and an open heart to hear what you're saying, and again, trying to decipher between fact and feeling and emotion. But that personal, I'm done listening as a board member. And I've said that as much. When we were having that, even when Carrie was a superintendent, I was like, this is not okay for you to act this way.
Yeah.
It just simply, we need to just call it out. And we have our own accountability for things that we know we need to do. And when we need to be, held accountable for the action in the direction we may be giving, our superintendent, what we're trying to do, and really being an understanding of, as board members, what our roles is. And I think that's a critical piece that people really have to understand what the roles are, what we can and cannot do, and should not do in terms of that. And so when one may be feeling so passionate about something, and it's true passion to them, and they're really, but let's stay on the issue and not get personal, thinking that's going to move it one way or the other. I mean, you naturally are going to want to just defend, either defend it. For the most part, I'm like, okay, I'm not going to say anything, because it's not going to be pretty if I were to do that, and it wouldn't be fair. That's not who I am, and who I and never want to be, and work hard not to be. It doesn't mean that I won't speak directly, to that point. So I just say that public comment, this is an opportunity. It's in the purview of what's going on, and what's in the purview, and fully understanding what it is, and board members, what they can and cannot do. And I think, communication is absolutely clear.
Yeah.
Every time we need to say this is, but for me, that's time to speak. And that's great that you're participating in me. But the minute it gets personal, I'm done listening.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm done listening. I'm sitting there and you know, but I, you know, if you could listen, but am I hearing you? No, that is gone. That is gone.
And I always think of it too, as like, if you were talking to your spouse or your partner, your children, your significant other, your friend, there's no situation anywhere that I know of when you start yelling and pointing the finger that you're going to get the result you want. And so I don't know why people think you're going to get it with the board either.
And I have to say, at that point, there's nothing else that you have to say.
Yeah.
Because then you need to go personal, because you know, when you were saying what you had to say, you didn't feel it was being a nausea, whatever the case may be. So I'm just going to attack you personally, because you know, that'll get a reaction from you. But yeah, no.
Again, so I want to just wrap up that meeting, but I just want to say that was very much needed. Somebody at the board had to say something and take a stand, and you seized the moment. And much like that first time that I saw you speak, you know, outside of the board meeting at the Martin Luther King hearing, when you talked about uncommon courage, like we all can do the courageous things in the moment, right? Like the obvious things, many of us do, but it's the one where you're the only one who's doing it that's difficult, and that's true courage. And that's what you talked about, you know, at that Martin Luther King, and it's been the theme of what you talk about on the board. Wendy, can you talk to me a little about your background, your story, and how you came to Santa Barbara, and just sort of, I know you're first five, you're a school board member, you do a lot of things in the community, but what's your story?
Yeah, you know, I have a story. I'm of great women, strong, powerful women, and strong, silent men. Dad, my grandparents, my great grandparents, and I, you know, I am so, and you see this like light up, because I love from where I come, and that helps me in those moments of the leadership piece, and you know, and expectations and all those different things. And I come from Texas. I'm so proud of some of the things we do in Texas, but you know, some of the things we do, and you know, life takes us where we end up or do whatever. But that's where I was born, and where my values were instilled in me in such a strong way. You know, I used to sit on my great grandmother's porch and you know, and get that understanding and what they expected of us to do. And it was always where you can lead from where you are. You may not be the leader, but you can, and we expect you to, right? And so I was just looking at some papers, just cleaning out some things today, and I thought, wow, these women who have influenced my life. It was in Texas, and it is who I am. And my great grandmother was like, "Don't y'all worry about anything. Y'all just come on the porch. Everything's gonna be okay," because we talked about those things and who we are. And what was expected of us to lead when it was necessary, and be in that moment and say what's happening here and understanding things. And so I was taken with me. You know, I had some trouble, as they say, at a gas station, but I had a crazy boyfriend that lost his mind. So, and in that moment, I found mine. I packed my stuff and I left. You know,
okay.
and you know, and I left with, you know, like, oh, I got to find another way, and maybe perhaps even find who I am, right? To be able to spread my wings. And so my uncle was home for Christmas, and he who lives out here, and I followed him back, and that's how I got here. And you know, my grandfather said, "Hey, if you get there and you don't feel like it, I'll come out there and get you." So that type of, I got your back. I'm here for you, and I trust you and believe and support you. That sustains me today, right? And so I came here with that, and I was always like, and my grandmother said, "Wendy, you were born with your eyes wide open." Like, she was, "That's a little scary. That little girl's gonna be nosy." So I hope that has served me well, to have my eyes wide open to the whole picture of things, and you know, to have that sturdy foundation when things get a little shaky in life. And so I came here with that fortitude and courage and expectations of what I could and could not do. And I've never really been afraid to speak things, to be in things, and try to change things. I went to school in Missouri for a little bit when my grandparents were out there, and my mom was attending nursing school. And I played basketball, but there was no girls basketball team. And I'm like, I think that's unfair.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
I made the boys basketball team. And then it was like, well, what are we going to do with her? Where's she going to play?
Wow.
So there's
Mhm.
lots of things. So, just so many things prepare us in our childhood for who we're going to be. And you hear me talk about early childhood. Those experiences are so critical and so crucial. And that's another piece, to our, as we start to look in the district, how we respond, making sure that we talk about racial and diversity inclusion in those early years, so that people understand, and our children understand, and how do we work with our parents, and how do we connect those two. And so that's been a part of who I am and what I've come, and the amount of folks that I've met that have changed my perspective, my life, and has fortified and supported. And in that moment, if I could go back for, when this is happening, I don't know if you know Dr. Shirley Kennedy, but she has papers that are at UCSB. She was an awesome community leader, and often about not in our town. And I must say, when that came up, the incident in Santa Barbara Junior High, her spirit came so strong in me,
Mhm.
so strong in me, that we cannot not address this. And that, again, it's here again. And so I've really been looking at, the experiences that I had with her, who was a leader. I was very fortunate to have a leader in the community that would help us and guide us, and even in this moment. And so that spirit was there. And so I just kind of come to know some different things of how life was going to be and how it was going to change. Um, um, okay. So yeah, so just all of the, and my experience here in Santa Barbara, the things that I needed to do, I it has strengthened who I was, as a young woman, experiencing some of the things that went on in my childhood, and helped me better understand those things, and knowing that you have to be involved in that. And so when those opportunities came to be involved, I tried to do that and take advantage of those moments to do that. And even though sometimes I find myself being an only one. So, like right now, the board 53 years before another African American was there. And so I take that very seriously. I take that, I feel very privileged. I take it as a full responsibility to do what I can, while I'm there, and how to impact the longer part of things. And so my background has always been step up. You can do this. You got the support. Don't be afraid to step where you need to do. And I must admit, there have been times when I've been a little like insecure about doing those things, and being a window dressing for someone. And I'm very clear about that's not what I'm going to be. I'm going to speak. And if you're truly trying to be diverse and inclusive, then let's make sure that's what you're doing it for. And really, so we can better learn and really fulfill our mission, if that's what's included in your mission, and not just in that moment. Here's what we're saying, but that's not really what we're doing. So that's very important for me. And I think that's very, very important, that we have to make sure that we're modeling that for our students and those young folks that are in the community, and other folks as well. Your kids will listen. I mean, they will not necessarily listen to us, but they'll definitely imitate us. But I think that's at other adults too. Okay, I'm just going to do what you're doing, and because you're doing that, right? I hear what you're talking, but your actions speak differently. So I feel very privileged just to be where I am, and sometimes it is very hard to be there. I was trying to think. I was come across this something that about being one type of thing, and I'll find it in a minute. But you're one. I think I can't think of his name. Hale is his name. Then I'll find it to make sure it's accurate. But in terms of I am one, and but I am one. I'm only one, but I am one, right? And while I can't do everything, I can't make that excuse not to do anything. And so I look at that and being honest, and hopefully when those areas where I'm not, and then having the courage to step in places where there's not as much diversity, and not necessarily the racial part, but even thought process, where the thoughts are not, the thoughts are like, they're just one thought. How can we diversify the thinking, and perspective? So how do we do that? So I'm grateful. I didn't always understand my upbringing and where it was going to lead me. But every ounce of it has come forth in the way I lead, and in these moments of leadership, and realizing that again, you can lead from wherever you are, and when you are the leader, making sure that you include everyone around you that can support you as a leader in that moment, and your direction and your vision is that everybody's able to find and see themselves in, and carry it forward. And sometimes I think as a leader, you need to follow. And I think that, as a board member, when the public come in or comments are coming, I say, is there something in there that I need to maybe follow? What's maybe take a step back and follow what's going on, and making that decision to be inclusive of everybody's thoughts, and even the ones that I disagree with. But that okay, I might see where you're coming from, but let's figure out where we can go. And I most recently read a book called The Best of Enemies, and that has really given me perspective in about there was I think it was a member of I want to say it might have been. It was in the Carolinas, I'm not sure, north or south, but I just really kind of picked up the book, but I had read it in pieces and phases. And about you're on two opposing sides. It was a community leader and a member of the Ku Klux Klan, and they had to come together, and it's, because the school had burnt down, all black school had a fire, and they're like, they could just go in another part of the, and she's like, no way, this is not happening, and so standing up for that in the midst of all of that. And in the end, even though they didn't necessarily, agree on they were still, on opposite ends of things, but they became the best, the best of enemies in the sense that they found a center to come together. And there were thoughts and changes, in their perspectives. And I think when we're in this place and space with such division, that we've got to find our center. And so that we both, if we all care about what's going on, then find our center and find our way to the center, figure out how best to do it. We have to be willing together to do all that we can, because, it's together, it's being together is how we will and how we can make lasting change.
What was your impression when you came to Santa Barbara? Has Santa Barbara changed between then and now in terms of just, the acceptance, culture, attitudes? What was your first take?
Well, I followed my uncle out here, and and so there was a community that I was introducing to friends, and he's been in this community for a long time, and I felt there was much more of a larger community, then than there is now. But it may or may not be, in terms of it, we're just more spread out across, and so maybe if we come together, like, oh yeah, there's a community there. And I think it's just reconnecting, because a lot of the young folks couldn't afford to live here. And so a lot of things people have moved out to just to have a life and to thrive and do those things. But yet the issues that folks who have been here a long time and some who are still here, they're still here. But they were very active and had, getting together and dealing with those issues, as I talked about, Dr. Shirley Kennedy and that generation that was here, they were ready to respond, and they weren't reactive, they were responding, because it was like, we got to work on this. And so you knew when things were happening, in terms of that. And even where you may have, now integrated something, you knew you had a community that it was going to take to support you through and navigate through that, being an only person there or whatever, being a first or case. But, so when I first came, I was like, where's the Black folks? So when I came, because but yet I understood it, because, our school, I was used to like being the first Black to do this or first Black to do that, but it was a supportive community from all aspects. And my band teacher was awesome when I was running for student council, and you didn't see Black students in student council. And I'm like, why not? So I was always asking that question. That wasn't unfamiliar to me. But the fact that we're still dealing with it is not unsurprising, but disappointing, right? So I think that we have to continue to do that work and bring that honest conversation there. Why aren't there? Because I'll ask myself and say, wait a minute. So are you asking yourself who's not at the table? And I think that's in terms of, we're asking who's not here, as opposed to who's here and who's always here, meaning that we have the same perspective to things. And I think we just have to ask that. And I don't think we do a good job necessarily of nurturing a diverse pool of potential leaders. at all.
Mhm.
Because I think, and as a community, how do we come back and connect together, not just around the controversial, challenging things? How do we, again, doing the work throughout the time, that what do we need in leadership? We need to have a diverse leadership. We need to prepare our young folks in a diverse way. As a community, we need to do that. And
Yeah.
all perspectives need to be there, because I'm worried about all the, to be a leader right now in this place, it's hard. And someone may be turned off. Like, I don't want to deal with that. I
Right.
don't even want to be paid to deal with that. Right. And so, but I think the more that we're preparing ourselves to meet the moments as a community, and calling up ourselves, and inviting ourselves to do things differently as a community in all aspects of what we do and where we're connecting. And so I've been, fortunate to work on, fund for Santa Barbara, there, and get a different perspective. I saw a community that I wouldn't necessarily have seen, but through being on the grant making committee there, and understanding what's out there, what's working, who's doing the work, because oftentimes you don't see that. But when the grants are going out, you can get to see who's doing the work, and where can we develop leaders through that. And also sometimes criticize, like, because I am coming with the question, so why aren't there more of this, or why aren't women, Black folks, where is it? So come with the questions, and be fair about that. And I think that that's something that we need to do. And again, it's us right now. It's time right now. We can't wait for somebody else to be elected, or somebody. It's right now. What are we doing with our positions right now? And let's have those conversations in those leadership positions where we are. What are we doing to better do? And where can we assess that? Right? Where can we assess that? Have an assessment. Here's where we are at this moment, which is why I want us to have a baseline.
Yeah.
It's gonna get ugly, because it's gonna unearth some things,
Yeah.
as things were coming out, because we haven't necessarily dealing with the fact that we are working to do that. And I think that spreads outside to the community as well. When I talked about how we can really be this model for how we want this community to be, the time is now to do it.
Yeah.
And it depends on who's in the leadership, who's doing what, which we know. What's in the leadership is going to perpetuate or impede, whatever the cases may be. And how do we continue to be authentic, and how we really want to do this again? It's because we're working in the moments when it's not. And when we come around to this story again, Josh, wow, we've come a long way. We've done great things. And it's not because it's because we've worked really hard at it, and we're continually to work hard at it, and make sure we're holding ourselves accountable as the leaders in this, and we're developing leaders who hold themselves accountable. And we are our sister and brother keepers, whether we want to say that or not.
Mhm.
We are. So in terms of that, because again, it's going to take all of us to do where we need to do it. And I'm very hopeful. I'm proud of this district. Sometimes you have to stand up and take some things, and proud of saying, let's just own where we are right now, and how can we do better. And when we're not, making sure we adjust to make sure that we are moving always in a place of being better. We must demand of ourselves to do better, be better, and don't accept anything less than that.
Yeah. And you touched on a good point, is how do we cultivate the next generation of leaders? And, I think that for Black people, for people of color, for myself as a Mexican American, so many times growing up, you just don't see yourself being there. You don't think that you belong there. You think that's for other people, and you need to go do something else. And I think that's the real difficulty that a lot of people don't understand who are in this place of privilege, is that if you and I go out right now and we walk around Santa Barbara, we're going to see a very diverse community. Okay. But if we go to these government buildings, and we go to these boards and these commissions, and we go to the staff members, we're going to see a lot of people who don't look like you and I in charge here. You're making the leadership decisions. And so I think that's part of it, is hiring people of color, hiring people who reflect the community, who can be role models without saying, here's a role model. We don't want to do that, right? Nobody wants that.
Right.
But we want to just be able to say, oh, you did that. How did you do it? I want to do it. Maybe you can help mentor me, or maybe I can learn from you. And then it becomes naturally just sort of the standard of like, I belong there. It's not just these other people who belong there. And over time, and so I think that's why it's so important, and just to bring it full circle, for people such as yourself to seize the moment, talk, don't wait, don't pause. If you have a microphone and you need to address something, do it, because whether you realize it or not, or whether you're trying or not, think of how many people you affected at this one board meeting just by talking, right? And of course, there's all the insiders who are talking, but what about the students at the school districts who heard you? That's where the real change is. So I think, again, you should be commended for using your voice to speak out, and hopefully continuing to speak out, not just in that loud moment, as you put it, but throughout and going forward. You're running for re-election, is that correct, this year? Is that?
No, I'm not. I'm not up until 24, but we do have seats, and then we may have a potential, something depending on what's coming on the Board of Supervisors race. And I just want to go back to your point right there to say that I don't want to be an improbable, appointment. I don't want to be an improbable here. I want to make it possible because of the things that we do. And to your point about when we're developing and nurturing, I look at our Board of Supervisors, I look at our leaders where you're hiring staff, you're nurturing leaders. So you need to look at your staff and say, and I'm looking at my staff in my executive positions that I'm putting my executive, assistant and all of those in those places, look there and say, does it reflect the future of leaders? And if not, I'm not saying, just the one versus the other, but how we want our community to be represented. And again, and so it's not an improbable win by somebody, because people like when I first, because nobody asked me the question about running for school board. So I had to ask myself that, and in terms of that, and I I was talking to a friend the other day. I said, I'm gonna write a book to call, well, why are you running? I was like, because nobody asked me. In terms of we have to ask ourselves. And I met someone who's been in this thing for a long time, and she said, you make sure you get a tribe of women behind you and do the things. She says, yeah, ask yourself the question and don't be willing to take no for an answer. And so I think that's the part that we have to do. Ask ourselves those questions who are not readily visible, but ensure that we have done the things that we need to get involved in things. And how are we making sure we're including people in those places and spaces, and being mindful, as you said, of the words that we speak, because they do make a difference in how someone may see themselves, perceive themselves, in terms of that. It may invite someone in who wouldn't necessarily be thinking that they would or want to. So I think there's so much that we can do. We just have to be ready to do it, have the courage to do it, because it does. In the midst of all, where you have people coming, this board is being attacked, not only just with some of the things we're not doing internally, but externally. We realize what's happening. We have 2 seats that are coming up, in 22. And now that we're in districts, what does that look like? I wasn't necessarily a proponent of going to districts. I just kind of felt that it really wasn't addressing what that law was trying to do. And I continue to push for making sure that if you are running for school board, because that's just where I am right now, but I mean, running for school board and making sure there's a mandated free training so that you truly understand what you have to do and what your responsibilities and what your roles are as a school board member. It is then we're informed representatives of the school district, what we can and cannot do, and that also allows us to talk and speak to the public, who sometimes figure, you can do this, I have the pressure to do this, I have this to do that. And so that when we are talking about ed code, it doesn't come across defensive.
Yeah,
it's a part of who we do. So the more that we're educated and informed as board members, the better representatives we will be for our students.
great. Well, thank you, Wendy Sims-Moten. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I just appreciate you taking time on your busy schedule to meet and talk to your constituents, myself, and people who watch and listen to this show. Thank you so much, and good luck to everything, and hopefully we'll talk again soon down the road.
We're gonna make it. We're gonna take it again. I'm saying, Josh, now you talking was real loud at that moment. So here we are. So how are we gonna do it? And we're gonna look at how we're gonna grow from this, and how and where we're gonna grow from it. I believe that we will, and this is our time to make sure we do. And I found that quote. I just wanted to be fair. It says, sure. I'm only one, but I am one. I cannot do everything, but I can do something. And because I cannot do everything, I will not refuse to do the something that I can do. And that's how I feel that we can do as individuals, and as we certainly can do and will do as Santa Barbara Unified School District.
All right, great. Thanks a lot, Wendy Sims-Moten. Have a great day.